Peace, peace, good people. It's your sister, Morgan Renee Myers, tuning in with another story time with Maura Mai. We are in the book For Freedom's Sake, The Life of Fannie Lou Hamer by Chana. Please do yourself a favor and me as well. Share this video. We are in February 2024, Black History Month. Why not? Also, because I just have great readings, my goal behind Storytime with Maura Mai is to expose more listeners and readers to books by black authors and or about black folks' lives. The last book I read, the story about Henrietta Lack's life, was written by a white woman, but I do like to get melanated BIPOC people's stories out there, and especially around the topics of civil rights, self-sustainability, agriculture, things of that nature. So let's hop right into the book. If you are not subscribed to my YouTube, you can do so by typing in Storytime with Maura Mai, M-O-R-E-M-Y, or my name, Morgan Myers, M-Y-E-R-S. You'll see a red logo with a yellow M, and then you can catch up on all my future, past, and present readings, and some other things. I'll be doing some gardening tips, some plant-based recipe videos, my crochet creations. It'll be popping. So let's get into it. For Freedom's Sake, The Life of Fannie Lou Hamer, Chana. I was left off in chapter 6, so I'm picking up on page 114. Throughout her work on the challenge against the racist politicians from Mississippi, Hamer continued battling foes within the civil rights community. Her disagreement with and hostility towards, so real quick recap of the last part of chapter 16. Basically, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, MFDP, is going around up and down, getting into politics, trying to fight for their rights, trying to register to vote, doing a lot of stuff, getting a lot of flack from the white folks. So there was a opening for them to get to be voted for to be, like members of Congress or something like that. And so they was just having all kind of challenges. They was not letting these people come vote and represent themselves. So they did a mock vote in their town of Mississippi, and based on those numbers, they went back to challenge, the House, the Congress, that had y'all allowed us to rightfully come do what's our right, y'all wouldn't be sitting in these seats right now. So that's kind of what the part of the chapter we're going through. They did eventually deny her. They sent in this challenge in like December, and they didn't get heard from or get the final answer until I think let me see, like the middle of July the next year. Yeah. And then they gave their final report in September of that next year. So almost a whole damn year. Throughout her work on the challenge against the racist politicians from Mississippi, Hamer continued battling foes within the civil rights community. Her disagreement with and hostility toward traditional civil rights leaders and organizations grew throughout the spring. In March 1965, bad feelings between the Mississippi-based Council of Federated Organization, or FOCO, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, came to a head in COFO's convention. Relations between the national NAACP leadership and the Mississippi movement had grown noticeably strained. The friction centered around decision-making, funding, and publicized personal insults. On one side were, for the most part, poor local Mississippi activists of Hamer's ilk and state, and on the other were the national NAACP officials who were financially and educationally middle class and had a reputation for being condescending toward black poor. Local Mississippi activists wanted to identify their own problems and determine their own solutions without much input from middle-class people, whether they were from Mississippi or elsewhere. Deciding whether a particular community needed more resources devoted to self-help cooperatives or intensive voter registration work, or both, should be left up to the folks most affected by such a decision. Those who held this perspective had a political agenda that placed local need above all else. On the other hand, NAACP activists in the state branch and national office had serious questions about the effectiveness of the localist strategy. Doubts centered around capability and experience, and sometimes it surfaced in insulting public statements made by national officials such as Gloucester Current and Roy Wilkins. Both factions believed the other to have an attitude problem. Hamer's side felt that the NAACP thought itself superior and better able to determine what was best for Mississippi. However, the NAACP thought Hamer and her supporters were unappreciative and unfair in their criticisms of the NAACP, and that the local people only wanted the NAACP around when local campaigns needed financial or legal support. I mean, mean, yeah, because if we ain't getting treated right locally, this fighting for everybody right is cool, but we need some stuff right here at home. All right, let me write down the names. So that's one thing I like to do. I like to look up definitions and write down content to study layers. So the two brothers from the NAACP was Gloucester Current and Roy Wilkins. I have to go look up some of their interviews, see what kind of smack they was talking. And that is an interesting divide, and black people still be dealing with that today. Classism, colorism, we can't get along because we look like you beneath us if you ain't making a certain amount of money or you look a certain way. Man, the young people. Although the convention began with customary prayer and singing, the proceedings soon became contentious when the NAACP state president for Mississippi, Aaron Henry, and Fannie Lou Hamer spoke to the issue of NAACP support for local causes in Mississippi. Both Henry and Hamer wanted clarification on NAACP's role in local civil rights activities. Henry was concerned about the perception and understanding of the NAACP's role. Hamer questioned whether the NAACP was actually committed to involvement in local activities, given recent public statements made by NAACP officials. Yeah, like, people, like, what we saying? Y'all talking shit in the interviews and for the media, but when y'all come back here, y'all keeping the same energy or no? Hamer questioned whether they were actually committed to involvement in local activities, given recent public statements made by NAACP officials. Specifically, Hamer cited Roy Wilkins' alleged disavowal in the New York Times of NAACP support for COFO. Okay, then COFO meant what again? The Mississippi-based Council of Federated Organizations. Okay. Excuse me. Let me write that down too. COFO. Henry responded by pointing out how the NAACP was concerned about not being contacted regarding COFO project plans until people were jailed and bills came due. He also noted that NAACP branch presidents were turned off by a takeover attitude that seemed to characterize COFO summer workers. He also complained about derogatory comments made by these same workers about the NAACP. Henry added that the National NAACP had arranged to monitor COFO speakers working in local areas in order to rethink his participation in COFO. On his point about the takeover attitude in COFO, a local activist, Georgiana Dyson of Meridian, Mississippi, disagreed and noted that COFO just wanted to get something done. Dyson continued her defense of local movement activists and their decisions. She even defended COFO, especially on the subject of sex. Clearly, Dyson came down on the side of Hamer and other local action-oriented folks. Fannie Lou Hamer persisted on the matter of NAACP public statements that she found offensive and, most important, indicative of the underlying perception problem facing COFO and NAACP. Most problematic, NAACP officials thought she and others were inferior and lacked what it took to make good decisions. She noted that in a memo from a national official, Gloucester Current, the NAACP had expressed, I didn't read that right, let me slow down. She noted that in a memo from a national official, Gloucester Current, the NAACP had expressed the opinion that local people in Miss needed someone to think for them. Hamer objected, to the Current statement, a statement that sounded all too familiar to Roy Wilkins' comment to the NFDP after his 1964 Democratic National Convention challenge. Mrs. Pidgey of Clarksdale, Henry's home, told Hamer, "You can't believe what you read in the papers." Pidgey defended the NAACP on all counts and noted that the NAACP was being put on trial unfairly. In fact, a number of local activists defended the NAA, and they were, as they referred to the organization. One was Mrs. Davidson of Columbus, Mississippi, who decried COFO's insulting treatment and atheism. Not all of the local folks stood with Hamer. Throughout the convention, Hamer continued to challenge the NAACP role in and perspective of the Mississippi movement. The organization was just not engaged in a way that satisfied her. In fact, for Hamer, the NAACP was looking more like part of the problem. At another point in the convention, she broached the issue of class as a factor in the kinds of leaders and the types of decisions made by the national and state branches of the NAACP. In her typical blunt style, she took on decision-making as well as the black middle class and its criticisms of people clothing. How much have the people with suits done? If they dressed up had been here, then the kids in jeans wouldn't be here. Preachers and teachers look down on little people. Excuse me. But now these little people are speaking up. Give me a second. Another local activist chimed in, offering support to Hamer's charges and general position. Of particular concern was the NAACP's inefficient hierarchical structure. Hazel Palmer accused people in Jackson NAACP peers of just playing at freedom. She pointed out the inability of the Jackson folks to do anything without prior approval from the national NAACP headquarters. She noted that by contrast, she and others were not playing at freedom. Instead, they were working for a deeper freedom. After a 10-minute recess, the COFO meeting reconvened and Hamer reopened the meeting, since Aaron Henry had to leave to attend the NAACP board meeting. She moved to resume the meeting by discussing next summer, not the past stuff. She urged the group along by reminding them the Freedom Democratic Party is made of local people, and it is presently making up its own program for the summer. In clear reference to the privileged mainstream NAACP leadership, she advised, we shouldn't let a few people determine what's going to happen in this. Everybody, even little people, should have a movie in deciding what kind of project we're going to have. She called on others to be critical and consistent in their thinking and speeches when invoking words like equality and democracy. She understood what was truly at stake. In her mind, some say that we're fighting for equality, but I don't want to be equal to murderers. We're fighting for democracy. If we had it, the Freedom School in Indianola would not have been burned or the people put in jail. We want to make Mississippi a democracy where we make our own decisions. Ooh, we do not want to be equal to murderers. We want a democracy. I love that. No sooner had Hamer assumed the role of chairing the meeting than Eddie Thomas of Vicksburg took the floor and announced that Aaron Henry had left him in charge and had asked him to chair the meeting. Hamer seemed to have no problem with this. After all, Thomas was a localist who supported her perspective on local folks running their own show independent of the NAACP. After Hamer's opening remarks, the tone and direction of the meeting turned decidedly radical. Thomas made a statement indicating the general tenor of the second half of the convention proceedings. They, NAACP, can send carloads from anywhere, but they can't change my mind about working with COFO and the MSDP, he told them. He declared, if the NAACP has a different plan, I don't know what it will be. If it is different from what we've already laid out, I won't support it. Like Hamer, he drew a line in the sand and issued a stern warning. He added, we have to be aware of the wolves, black moderates. When we get this thing moving, then they'll sell you to the white man, and it will be another 100 years before we get something half as good. But if we beware of the wolves, then they can't change us. During the second half of the convention, participants began to talk openly about the MFDP and its concerns, whereas before, Henry had declared that the convention was not an MFDP meeting. Howard Spencer could not think any less of Henry's declaration. We want anybody who's here to help us, but we want them to know that they have come on our terms, not on Roy Wilkins's terms. We have the power to make our own decisions. We have to get involved with the MSDP, which is our organization. On the question of educational background, he added, COFO is a people's movement, not a group of organizations. We have tremendous power if we get our people together. I am the son of a Methodist minister, but I know that educated people aren't any different or better than ordinary people. To this, Thomas responded, that pretty well solves that problem. What about housing? Thomas also noted with apparent jubilation, I've been going to meetings for over a year now. At COFO meetings last year, we used to hear the workers talk. I just listened. But this year, the local people are doing the talking. While the local folks took over the convention, the NAACP board meeting continued upstairs. Hamer was not finished with the issue of an NAACP presence in rural Mississippi. She continued expressing irritation at indecision on whether to work with COFO on another summer project. She observed, this is the thing that puzzles me. Why can't they tell us now if they want to work with us? I don't like to criticize, but a lot of things can happen when money is involved. To illustrate her point, she then recounted the tone and content of a conversation with Charles Evers, brother of the late Medgar Evers, the assassinated state president of the Mississippi NAACP. On a trip to Chicago, according to Hamer, Charles Evers told her she shouldn't be working for nothing. Hamer indicated that she disagreed with Evers and reiterated to the convention that the movement was larger than what went on in Mississippi. We're not fighting for myths. We're fighting for the whole country. I learned that in Washington, D.C. during the congressional challenge. I'm not saying the NAACP hasn't done good in its time, but we move in the present, not the past. We poor people will have to move without them. Hamer used this occasion to signal the need and the inevitability of poor people taking over the movement, particularly in areas of decision-making. And that's how it should be. If the higher-ups ain't looking out for you, if work ain't getting done, those being affected got to speak up and make changes for themselves. Following the COFO convention, Hamer went on with her congressional challenge duties. The national media tracked Hamer's activities and impact like a hawk. National press coverage had been appealing steadily since her stunning appearance at the 1964 Democratic Convention. Little of this coverage was positive. Most often it depicted her as an unwise, impatient, and irreverent rabble-rouser, especially vis-a-vis her more moderate counterparts in such national organizations as the NAACP. Among the publications that contributed to Hamer's unflattering press coverage in the spring of 1965 was the weekly magazine Newsweek. According to a Newsweek article on SNCC, Hamer was receiving her share of criticism from black moderates just as she was doling it out to them. In reference to the outcome of the bitter COFO convention, the article noted other Negro moderates say that Fannie Lou Hamer, the Freedom Democrats' leading mouthpiece, is showing disturbingly demagogic tendencies, attacking middle-class Negroes and whites, American policy in Vietnam, and Martin Luther King. Some of the press coverage simply signaled Hamer's arrival. In assessing Hamer's significance since the convention challenge, the New Republic's Andrew Kopkind wrote that she embodied a new style of Southern black leadership. He observed that Fannie Lou Hamer was representative of a cadre that has little respect for the traditions of political compromise. According to Kopkind, she was among those MFDP delegates for whom the compromise offer meant that rights delayed were rights denied. Thus, Kopkind concluded that the MFDP convention challenge defeat marked a new phase inside the Freedom Democratic Party. It was at that point that Mississippi's older and more respected leaders started to pull away, and the new style leaders like Hamer started to wield greater influence. Little did the national press know, however, that Hamer and the MFDP were starting to fall out of favor with their mentor organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Not SNCC. By the spring of 1965, SNCC and the MFDP were becoming estranged from one another in the political sense. The source of the strain was twofold: money and the issue of local autonomy. Interestingly, these were the same issues that were bringing both grassroots organizations into conflict with the national and state branches of the NAACP. Ironically, through its struggle with the MFDP over money and autonomy, SNCC was discovering how it felt to be a jaded political guardian, for during its year-and-a-half-long relationship with MFDP, it had assumed the role of parent organization. Strained relations between the two undoubtedly foreshadowed Hamer's personal split with SNCC. In fact, activities and words between the two organizations might have precipitated and hastened Hamer's eventual move away from SNCC. SNCC was already going through an ideological and structural transition, a transition that the MFDP experienced 2 years later. Throughout their troubled times, each organization bandied about charges that the others were being too radical or not radical enough. At a SNCC executive committee meeting held April 12 to 14 in Holly Springs, Mississippi, some SNCC members expressed the feeling that the MFDP was a radical idea but not a radical party. Other discussions regarding SNCC's relationship with the MFDP indicated that relations were not at all cordial between the two. If the minutes from this meeting paint an accurate picture, relations were indeed uneasy. As Hamer continued speaking throughout the country, she began hinting at the direction in which she would head in following the challenge. In support of the MFDP in Cleveland, Mississippi, Hamer, along with MFDP leaders Unita Blackwell and Susie Ruffin, spoke at the Community People's Conference. Of the three speeches, a reporter noted, "It was impossible for me to capture the emotions of people when they listened to Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, Mrs. Unita Z. Blackwell, and Mrs. Susie Ruffin of the MFDP." In addition to encouraging more Freedom Party movements throughout America, the three women also addressed topics such as welfare, housing, and education. In large part, this was in response to the purpose of this conference, which was to try to find ways to solve the problems that confront the poor people of America. The gathering was described as not a conference of Negroes and whites, but truly a conference of community people. People in the attendance came from California and from states in the Northeast, South, and Midwest. In addition to moving the crowd with her speech, Hamer also sang the gospel song, Go Tell It on the Mountain, the lyrics of which encouraged believers to tell of a new day, a new joy on the horizon. For Hamer, this new day was about economic empowerment for black people in Mississippi. She returned to this focus through her work with the Mississippi Freedom Labor Union in spring 1965. Okay, so that's the end of this chapter. Got some pictures. Fannie Lou Hamer represents the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in the 1964 Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City. Okay, Fannie. It got her with Lou Hamer, Edwin King. She's addressing a crowd. Not even really that great of pictures. That's Fannie. Doing her thing, getting up there, speaking up for the people, speaking up for herself. Fannie Lou, surrounded by family members. Perry Pat Hamer, her husband. And this is there at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. They got a state senatorial campaign and received an honorary doctorate from Tougaloo College. Okay. That's what's up. And then this is a weary campaign worker's rest head on Fannie Lou's shoulder. Because it be real out here in these streets. Alright, so that's the end of chapter 1, and we'll pick up with chapter 7, the Mississippi Freedom Labor Union, at another time. I hope y'all have a great rest of y'all day.